Hi everyone, how are y'all doing? The half month has arrived, and with it, a new, annoyingly restrictive Abyss. Unfortunately, this means my normal content is just not going to be as entertaining, so instead I'll be doing something slightly different today. I'll be attempting to help those of you who might be struggling to clear this Abyss, and hopefully by the end of this video, you can also clear with 36 stars. We're going to be covering all the enemy information, as well as what strategies and characters you can use to get a faster clear time. Real quick, if you guys do enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like and let me know in the comments below. I might consider making this a consistent thing for all the new Abysses, if it helps you guys. But without further ado, let's get straight into it, starting with the Abyssal Moon Blessing and the Leyline Disorder. The Abyssal Moon Blessing will trigger a shockwave every time a pyro reaction happens. You'll see as we move on that pyro characters are pretty much essential for most parts of this Abyss, so the blessing is kind of just something that will passively happen without you really having to consider its existence. So there's really not much to say about it, it's just kind of there. Now for the first half Leyline Disorder, we get a 75% pyro normal attack damage bonus. Now the obvious winner from this is Arlecchino, given that she's going to be on the banner very soon. This buff is specifically made for her. However, arguably Yoimiya gets an even bigger buff from this, because she never bursts, so pyro normals are literally 100% of her damage. So this buff is pretty massive for her. On paper, versus some of these first half enemies, she's just kind of a decent pick, but with this buff, she's one of the best, to be honest. Now, obviously, Arlecchino is also one of the best picks for the first half, but I also want to specifically highlight Yoimiya, because she's kind of a forgettable character most of the time. So, Yoimiya mains rejoice, your character is finally useful. But other than those two, most other pyro DPS don't get as much from this, because usually they trigger reactions with their charge attacks or skills. So normal attack damage bonus doesn't do a ton for them. Like, it's a minor bonus, but it's not worth building your whole team around it if you're like a Hu Tao main or something. Anyways, moving on to the second half, we get a 75% Night Soul aligned damage bonus. This one's honestly very self-explanatory. All your Natlan DPS are going to be getting sizably buffed from this, so Mawika, Kenich, Mualani, Chaska, and somewhat Ororon. But honestly, that's about it. There really isn't much to say about this one, so let's just hop into the enemies. Beginning things off with Floor 12, Chamber 1, first half. Keeping with the recent trend of 3 small enemies and then a boss enemy, we have 3 I don't know. There's 3 of them. They have about 370,000 HP each. And then once those are defeated, the gluttonous Yomkasaur Mountain King will spawn with 3.6 million HP. Mechanics-wise, this is one of the simplest halves of this Abyss. The first 3 enemies are a complete joke, no special strategy there, just pretty much kill them till they're dead. The boss has a bit more thought process to it if you want to optimally defeat him though. First thing to note is that he has 70% Dendro resist, so it is very highly not advised to bring a Dendro team against this fight. For most of the fight, he's just a stationary boss with a big hitbox, so you can kinda just go ham on him. But there is one pretty simple mechanic and one attack that you should probably watch out for. Around 20 seconds after he spawns, give or take a few seconds, he will spit out 3 fruits. You need to hit each of these fruits with pyro, and then once you do this, they will explode and do a large chunk of damage to the boss, as well as stun him. If you ignore this mechanic, he will swallow the fruits and do a fire breath attack that is pretty easy to dodge. Even though the immediate punishment for ignoring the mechanic is pretty negligible, losing out on the damage from the fruits and the stun window will heavily hurt your clear time, so it's pretty not recommended to skip this mechanic. Because of the Abyssal Blessing, Leyline Disorder, and just the general strength of pyro characters, most of the time your team's already going to have a pyro character in it, so this mechanic isn't really one you have to put a ton of thought into, but if you are not using one, you should consider trying to fit one into your team so that you can do this mechanic. I'm here from the future, because I noticed something while I was editing this. You actually can do this mechanic with Jean. You don't need a pyro character at all. So if you are struggling with pyro characters, you can't fit one into your party, but maybe you play Farina, you can use Jean as your healer with her, and this mechanic is doable. So let me go ahead and kill these first guys real quick and show you guys how you do it. Alright, so at the start of every fight, he's gonna do this like fire breath attack, and it'll leave little fire fields on the ground. So just like that. Now what you can do with Jean is you can use your ult to self-animo, and then as you can see, I'm making a bunch of little pyro swirls everywhere I walk, so I can just walk into the fruits and they'll blow up, just like that. So you can do this if you really don't have any pyro characters around. Final thing to mention regarding this mechanic is that the second time he uses it, he will only spit out one fruit and will not be stunned when you break it. Finally, the one attack that you should probably watch out for is when he starts rolling around the arena on his stomach. He'll dash to the edge of the arena, and when he does this, if your team is very circle impact heavy, don't follow him and use your burst. Because shortly after he dashes to the side, he'll do another dash and go straight back to the middle of the arena. And you'll end up being away from all your circles. Other than that, the rest of this fight is pretty much just a DPS check. Moving on to Chamber 1 second half, we have 3 Iktomisaurus with about 370k HP, followed by the Wayward Hermetic Spirit Speaker with 2.3 million HP. The boss has 70% cryo res, but given how the fight works, I don't think anyone would bring a cryo here in the first place, but it's worth mentioning regardless. Like the previous half, the first 3 enemies are complete jokes and are only really there to waste your time, but once they are dealt with, the boss will spawn in the center, and right before she spawns, she will begin her mechanic that takes about 5 seconds to start. Now before we get into the mechanic, let's first break down a point of failure that most likely caused quite a large DPS loss to anyone struggling with this chamber. What most people will be inclined to do is kill the first 3 enemies, and then, as the boss spawns, they'll start a fresh rotation. They'll set up their supports, swap to their DPS, and now the boss is invincible. And you have no ults, and you can't break any of the reflections. Don't do this. Instead, what you can do is manipulate the boss spawn timing so you can get a full rotation off before it goes invulnerable. In order to do this, start your rotation as normal against the first 3 enemies, but right before you kill them, hold all your DPS and wait for your cooldowns. Trust me, the waiting is worth it. Once everything's ready to go again, you can do your support rotation as normal. Optimally, the last enemy will die towards the end of your support setup, allowing you to have a fully buffed up DPS in against the boss with no setup time needed, so you can pump some DPS in during that short window before the mechanic starts. Do note that this is only really something that you need to do if this is the way your rotations line up. Most of the time, if you have a strong team, you'll kill the first 3 enemies before you're even halfway through your first rotation, so you'll be able to still do damage during that window regardless. But if your rotations happen to line up in a way that is kind of awkward, this waiting strategy can help you get some extra damage. Once it starts that mechanic, it will spawn 4 reflections that have cryo HP bars. You must break these by triggering reactions. Pyro breaks it the fastest, Electro takes twice as long as Pyro, and Geo and Animo require twice as much as Electro. And of course, Hydro, Cryo, and Dendro are unable to damage them. All this is to say, you want Pyro here. Mawika is going to be the best here. Her large AoE on her charge attacks means usually you can clip 2 or more of the illusions at once, which will help you burn through their HP bars very quickly. Hu Tao's also quite good here, as her charge attack has no ICD, but really any Pyro DPS or off-field Pyro applier will do just fine here. Note that if you're trying to use C6 Bennett for this, it's going to be a bit of a pain because you're locked to your circle and you have to wait for the illusions to come to you, whereas with most other Pyro characters you can just go to the illusions yourself. If you really can't use a Pyro, Electro is manageable too, though it is notably worse and any other element simply is not going to be fast enough. Now, some of you might not know this, but Ororon and Seatlali's charged attacks are able to pause the illusions and also take a chunk out of their HP bar, so they can also be quite valuable for this fight. But even if you bring one of them, you should still bring a Pyro character along with them to burst through the illusions while they're stunned. After you break all the illusions, the boss will be stunned and lose 40% all res, setting cryo res to 30% and all other to -30. At this point, it just becomes a DPS check if you can kill the boss before it creates the illusions again, which, to be honest, is not too hard considering it has pretty low max HP and very low resistances after you stun it. To start off the second chamber, on the first half we have 3 Xuanwen beasts, and these names are really giving me some trouble, each with about 650k HP, followed by a 2.5 million HP solitary Suani. This enemy has 70% Animo resist, so you should avoid bringing Animo DPS based teams here. Like the previous parts, the 3 enemies before the boss are just there to waste your time, nothing really special to them. Now, as for the boss, this is easily the most polarizing boss when you consider the difficulty of it when you do the mechanics properly, versus when you don't engage with them. The boss has 3 major mechanics. The first mechanic is the main freeze mechanic. It will imbue itself with Hydro and begin charging up an attack. You need to freeze it and then remove freeze by either melting, swirling, shattering, superconducting, or crystallizing it. Successfully doing this will stun the boss. If you fail this, it will immediately begin the swirl mechanic, where it starts charging up an attack and creates 3 animal balls around itself. You need to swirl all of these balls and the boss will be stunned. But keep in mind that the balls do damage to you when you pop them, so be careful. You must engage with this, because if you fail to swirl all the balls, it will create a big-ass tornado that follows you around, does damage, and constantly disrupts your movement, and honestly just makes the fight completely unplayable. The final mechanic is the lunge, where the boss will imbue itself with hydro and lunge forward. You deal with this the same way you deal with the main freeze mechanic, and just like the main freeze mechanic, successfully completing it will stun the boss. However, unlike the main freeze mechanic, if you fail it, nothing happens other than you losing a stun window for your DPS. This mechanic is quick and easy to miss, but if you can manage to catch it, you gain a large amount of damage. Now as for how to approach this boss, you can deal with it without bringing a cryo character, because every time you fail the main freeze mechanic, it's going to start the swirl mechanic, and literally any real team except for Mono Geo can easily do this mechanic. And to be honest, if you're trying to force Mono Geo in this Abyss, please reach out to me, I can get you in contact with a therapist. I'm sure you're going through a difficult time right now. But, if you do try to do this chamber without a cryo character, you need a very high damage team, because you have to wait out the whole freeze mechanic every time. Since he gains a large amount of resistance while charging, it kind of is a waste to attack him during it. Most of the time, it's worth making your team slightly weaker to slot a cryo character in for this chamber. By simply just doing all the mechanics, you can keep the boss stunned for like 70% of the fight, which really just turns it into an oversized punching bag. That's all there really is to it. Deal with the mechanics accordingly as they come at you, and you should be golden, especially if you can catch a few of the lunges. Now we move on to Chamber 2's second half, where things start to get pretty lame. This is where the Abyss becomes a box check rather than a build or skill check. Box checks are stupid, but I'll do what I can to help you guys figure something out. So this floor contains 2 Tenebris Memeses. I don't understand how to say these names, man. So this floor contains 2 Tenebris Memeses, each with about 750,000 HP, each coming in a separate wave, with the first one taking the form of a Ruin Guard, and the second one taking the form of a Secret Source Automaton Hunter Seeker. That's a mouthful. Now, if you played Last Abyss, you're familiar with these Tenebris guys and their Void Shield, but for those of you who are not familiar, here's the gist of it. These enemies are shielded, and in order to break their shields, you need Elemental Application. And Night Soul Aligned Application does bonus damage. In essence, this is just an Atlan check. But it can be deceptive. Despite Night Soul being strong against these shields, characters like Maoika, Sitlali, and Mualani are actually quite bad against the shield, as their elemental application is very slow. The Night Soul you're looking for is mostly what you can find in something like Kanich, Ororon, or Chaska. Kanich because his teams typically use Burning, which also happens to be quite good at dealing with the shields. Stack that with his solid Night Soul line application, and you can make quick work of the shields. Ororon because his ult does a large amount of Night Soul aligned elemental application in a short time. And on top of that, his best teams tend to use reactions that are also great at breaking shields, including Overload, Quicken, Hyperbloom, Electrocharge somewhat, and of course, Chaska, who is the final character I mentioned. Now those of you who pulled for Chaska likely are already aware of what she can do to these shields, but anyone who isn't aware and maybe would be considering going for her on a future rerun, basically she chews through these shields. She pumps out a ton of Night Soul aligned elemental damage, which also in turn triggers a bunch of random reactions, and all of that kind of just deletes these shields. So, all that is to say, if you have Kanich, Ororon, or Chaska, you really shouldn't have much issue breaking the shields. But if you don't have one of them, that's where things start to get a bit more tricky. It is definitely possible to make a team without Natlan characters to get through these shields, but it will be much trickier. Firstly, transformative reactions are your best friend. They do separate instances of damage whenever you trigger them, whereas something like a Vape will simply increase your damage, which does nothing to an application check-based shield. You want to run teams that pump out lots of reactions like Overload, Hyperbloom, Quicken, etc. Now, as much as I'd like to go through every possible team and how well they can handle these shields, we don't have that kind of time here, so I'll give a few examples and a general rule to help you make these teams for yourself. In general, you want teams that, when fighting normal enemies, make a bunch of small numbers as opposed to a few big numbers. This isn't really an absolute rule because there are some teams that might have a ton of numbers appearing, but due to ICD and other factors, they don't apply as much gauge as you might want. Teams that are good for this include Alhaitham or Kaching Quickbloom, Chlorind, Quicken, and Overload, or just a general Hyperbloom team. Now, I'm sure you've noticed a pattern with the reactions involved or the way these teams deal damage, and I hope that you can formulate the best one for your account. But if you're still struggling, drop a comment and I'll do my best to help you out. Anyways, that was a whole lot of yapping, but that's really all there is to this floor, to be honest. Figure out how to break the shields and the enemies will just keel over and die. I guess it is worth mentioning that sometimes the enemies will do a little wing flare before their attack, and if you get hit by this attack, it'll put a void mark on you, which after a small delay will burst and do a large amount of damage. If you get hit by that and somehow you're not stunned, swap to your tankiest member and let them eat the burst. But that's really about it for here. Let's move on to the final chamber. Starting off the final chamber, we have the Biting Cold Wyob Manifestation with 1.1 million HP, followed by a Construction Specialist Mech Numa, also with 1.1 million HP. When the Wyob spawns, he will create a Elementalist shield, drain all of your energy, and prevent you from gaining energy for the duration of the shield. Night Soul line damage will break the shield quicker, but the shield really isn't big enough to warrant building a whole team around it. I literally broke through this shield with just Farina's pets and Yoimiya's shots. Once the shield breaks, you get a large amount of energy, and he will be stunned. If you don't break the shield in time, he does a big AoE attack and converts the remaining shield to cryo. Breaking the cryo shield does not give you energy, but does stun him. You really shouldn't let it get this far because it takes quite a while to convert to cryo. Honestly, I think if you're getting to that point, you should try playing a team with a bit higher elemental application. While the shield drains energy, it does not completely turn off bursts that were activated before the Wyob put up his shield. Therefore, you have a few second window to pop your burst before he shields up. And these absolutely can make the difference between breaking the shield in time and not breaking the shield in time. If you enter the chamber low on energy, it is absolutely worth it to quickly reset and clear through the previous chambers again. Just make sure when you get to the end of Chamber 2 first half, you get all your important bursts ready before you kill the boss, so you can enter into the Wyob fight and instantly have your burst ready. Once his shield's down, he drops really quickly, and the enemy that spawns after honestly pops like a balloon. If you made it this far into the Abyss, I really see no reason for this enemy to be giving you trouble out of all the enemies in this Abyss, but if you really need to, you can smack him with some Uja. That's really about it for the first half, there's not too much to it. Now for the second half of the final chamber, we have the Tenebrous Papilla with 2.6 million HP. I guess torturing us for 1 month with this guy was just not enough. Oh yeah, and did I mention he has 70% all res, because why not? Basically, you enter the fight and he puts up a Void Shield. Yes, the same Void Shield from earlier. If you just skipped to this part of the video to see tips on this chamber, go watch Chamber 2 second half because it explains how to best deal with these shields, as well as the Void Mark on some of the hits. Anyways, once he puts up that Void Shield, he starts charging up a big blast. If you don't break the shield in time, it blows up and pretty much one-shots any character that's on the field. I've honestly never seen a character live through it. If you do break the shield, it becomes stunned and all res set to 0%. Once it recovers from the stun, the res will go back to 35% until the next time it uses the shield again. There really isn't much to say about the fight. Break the shield and kill the boss. Sadly, there's not really much outsmarting you can do here. Technically, you can dodge the blast from the charge by standing at the very edge of the arena, but then you have to deal with 70% all res on the boss at all times, so you would need absurdly high damage to get away with that. So yeah, that's really it for the individual chambers. Let's get into the overall summary and cover what units and teams are going to be the best here. So overall, this Abyss is mostly a check of if you have the units they want you to have, unfortunately. There are some strategies you can use to shave off a few seconds here and there, and it will add up in the end, but you can really only do so much. If you're struggling, your best bet is to take things one chamber at a time. Build teams specifically suited for a single chamber, clear it, reset, and make new teams for the next chamber. If you don't like resetting, let's talk about the best teams for each half. For the first half, the only thing you're really looking for are a cryo character and a pyro character. This leaves your team option for this side quite flexible. An example template is something like Pyro DPS, Hydro Support, Bennett, and Cryo Support. This is far from the only option, and you can really roll with any competent team that includes a Cryo and a Pyro, so you should focus your resources on the second half first, as this is where most of the restrictions come from. On this side, you need a Pyro character, Odoron, or Seitlali, as well as a setup that can easily deal with Void Shields. Some examples include Kanich Burning, Chaska, Mawika Overvape or Overload, and if you're missing Nightline characters, Hyperbloom, Quick Bloom, or Quicken. But yeah, that's honestly about it for this Abyss. If you have any questions or think I missed something important or need more specialized help for your account, let me know in the comments. I'll be reading all of them. That's going to be it for me today. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe for more. I have a Lanyan video cooking up right now, and hopefully the next Abyss will be a bit kinder so we can get back to some Abyss Challenge videos. Anyways, have a good one y'all, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.